This is video 1 for the Psych 642 Mixed Designs assignment. I'm going to start by briefly discussing exactly what a mixed design is and how it's different from independent and repeated measures ANOVAs. So just as its name, mixed design, implies, this specific type of analysis involves variables that are independent as well as repeated measures. So that's one way that it's different from both of them, is that it includes both types of variables, whereas the other two analyses only look at one or the other. So specifically what it can do is it can take these different types of variables and look at them in the same analysis, looking at both within subjects differences and between groups differences, all in the same analysis. So going back to that same information, when it should be used is it should be used whenever you have one or more repeated measures variables as well as one or more independent measures variables. In terms of assumptions, this test doesn't really differ much from the repeated measures ANOVA. It does still need all of the assumptions of the independent ANOVA, so the assumptions for pretty much all of the parametric tests need to be met, including normality. In addition to that, we'll also need to, if we're going to use the easy ANOVA function in R, check for sphericity. So it still has that extra assumption that the repeated measures ANOVA has, because we're still looking at repeated measures variables. And like I mentioned before, in terms of data, we do need to have at least one repeated measure variable and one independent measure variable. So there will be at least two factors involved in this type of analysis. In this assignment, I will be looking at a research question that is kind of an extension of the research question that I looked at from the last assignment, which was the repeated measures ANOVA assignment. I still plan to look at the effects of exercise on depression scores, specifically using that as a repeated measures variable, where I assign 3 different conditions to the same people of no exercise, exercising for 15 minutes, and exercising for 30 minutes. But in addition to that, I also want to look at whether the presence of friends or the presence of others impacts the depression score. So whether having no one else there, having one person there, or two people there impacts the depression score, as well as gender, looking at whether gender impacts the depression score. So I'm interested in seeing if specifically these 3 things interact. So from research literature, it's been shown that more activity, more exercise decreases depression scores, and that falls in line with what I saw last week in my assignment. In addition to that, there have been some gender-related linkages to the diagnosis of depression and the onset of depression differences in males and females, as well as research that supports that more social support and more social interaction leads to decreased, or is related to decreased depression. So I'm interested in seeing how all these things interact, because there's also been some evidence to possibly show that females are rely much more heavily on social interaction and place a great deal more importance on that than males do. So I'm interested to see if gender, whether or not there are friends present, kind of interact to influence how well exercise can maybe moderate this effect. Let me rephrase that. I'm interested to see how the three interact, to see if the interaction of maybe gender and the presence of friends moderates the effect that exercise has on depression scores. So in this study, I'll be looking at two repeated measures variables. The first, which I've already explained, is exercise, the amount of exercise. The second will be whether or not friends are present. So there will be a condition of where no one is present, then one where one friend is present, and then one where two friends is present. So in total, there will be 9 different repeated measures conditions that each person will be subjected to. And then there is one independent measures variable, which is gender. So the people will be split based on their gender into 2 different groups, male and female. So since I have that one independent measures variable and the 2 repeated measures variables, I'll be using the mixed ANOVA to run the analysis for this this experiment. All right, so now I'm going to take a minute just to provide an introduction to the data set. So as you can see, the data has been set up here in Excel in the wide format, where we have the 20 participants, their genders in column B, and then each of the 9 different conditions that they are exposed to, and the depression scores after being exposed to each condition. So the problem with this is whenever we go to do the mixed design ANOVA in R, it requires that the data not be in wide format. It requires that the data be in the long format. So that's going to be one of the first things that we do when we go into R, is convert the data into that new format. So I'm going to go ahead and import the data set. Okay, so now my data has been imported. And then I'm going to go ahead and open the script file for this assignment. So before I can do anything, I need to load the specific libraries. I'm going to go ahead and load all of the packages for this chapter, even though I may not use all of them. But I'm going to use the library function to load each package so that the functions that are included in the package will be available for me to use for the assignment. So even though I may not use this one, I'm going to go ahead and load the EZ package, which gives access to the Easy ANOVA functions, which is one of the ways to go about completing this type of analysis. The second package that I'm going to load is ggplot2. This will allow me to access the functions that I will need to build graphs. I am also going to load the NLME package, which will allow me to build a multi-level model. It holds the functions that are necessary for doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. And then I'm going to also load the past ECS package, which has the functions that I'll be using to get my descriptive statistics. I'm going to load the Reshape2 package, which has the functions necessary for reshaping the data, which we will be doing in just a second. And then finally, even though I may not use, or most likely I will not use this one, is the WRS2 package, which holds the functions for the robust test. Alright, so now that all of the necessary packages have been attached and opened for and are ready for use with all the functions that I'll need for the assignment, I'm going to attach the data set that I just imported so that it can also be used for the analysis. So, as I was mentioning earlier, I'll need to convert the data from the wide format to the long format. And to do this, I'm going to use the melt function, which you can see right here. And I'm going to melt it into a new data set called XFdata. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So you can see that I put in here the two kind of ID or independent measure type variables, the participants, and the gender, and then it shows all of the different groups or conditions or what are being measured. So let's see here. Go ahead and run that. You can see over here that another data set has been created, and I'll go ahead and open that so we can take a look at it. You can see that it's now in a long format based on the group, but the names are a bit off. So I'm going to go ahead and rename these to group and depression score. And you can see that I'm using the names function for that here, participant, gender, groups, and depression score for the columns. And then the last thing that I'm going to do to set up the data and get it ready is create the exercise and friends variables. So looking at the data set here, you can see that those two variables have been combined here into the variable groups. Well, I want to separate it out so that the analysis can be done. So I'm going to do that using the GL function. I'm going to create these two new variables with the levels, the number in each level, and then the labels. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for exercise, run that. Then I'm going to use the same function with the level, the number in each level, and then this gives the total number so that it will repeat over and over until it gets to that certain number to create that variable. And you can see now that it's created these, and it matches with what was initially said here under the groups, the no exercise and no friends. So now the data is set up and we're ready to take our next steps in preparing for the analysis, which we will do in video number 2.